So, Kerri, I want to thank you so much for accepting this interview for Coast to Coast with the CDA president. And no more fitting than to have a former CDA president be the first to be interviewed. To give insight to our fellow CDA members who is a part of the CDA and the fabric of what makes us dermatologists in Canada and what makes us very special. So thanks for accepting the interview, and with no further ado, we'll get into our questions.
That sounds great. I'm honored to be interviewed and happy to be here virtually with you.
Yes. So Kerri, I'd like you to be able to tell us how you came into the field of dermatology in the first place, and how did you end up in Halifax? Are you from there, or tell me the story?
Well, that part is a very easy answer. Yes, I am from Halifax. I'm born and raised in Halifax, and other than a few years spent living in Ontario, I've always lived in Halifax. So I've done all of my school at Dalhousie, which is here in Halifax. But I will say that it's not quite as straightforward with my journey to dermatology. In medical school, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Had a bit of time where I thought plastic surgery might be kind of cool, but I had decided no, internal medicine was the way to go, with a plan that I was destined towards the intensive care unit. I loved ICU. I spent a lot of time doing that and really had planned to go that way. During internal medicine residency in my second year, we had to choose selective. So we were allowed to do a couple of different internal medicine subspecialty rotations. And I kind of thought, dermatology would be good. And it's a bit of a break from the hustle and bustle, and I can kind of relax a bit. Let's do that. As I was doing the rotation, I realized I love this. This is super cool. Why didn't anyone tell me about dermatology? And basically ended up changing the trajectory so that when I went into the subspecialty match after my internal medicine in fourth year, I matched to dermatology, because at the time, Dalhousie still had an entry through internal medicine rather than a direct entry through CARMS. That came later. So that's how I got into dermatology.
Wow. It seems like such a contrast, because internal medicine, you're up all these emergency situations, and derm, you can reflect and think about it. And then how do you deal with the person that has a mole that bothers them when you were like into life and death situations?
It was certainly an adjustment. And I will tell you that probably for the first 1 to 2 years of my dermatology residency, I would have felt a lot more comfortable running an arrest code than I was being put on the spot at dermatopathology rounds. So fortunately, that has flipped as I gained a bit more knowledge. But, dermatology really has a lot of internal medicine in it. And you can really get that whole spectrum of patients, the younger, the older, everyone in between. And oftentimes you kind of feel like Sherlock Holmes coming in and twisting the key for these very complex medical patients. So it actually does fit. And as it turns out, the pace is probably better for me. I think I probably would be burned out had I gone down the ICU route. So I think definitely in terms of career choices, it wasn't what I was expecting, but it has turned out to be the right choice.
Super. It's great to be able to say that. So what sort of challenges have you had along the way? And what sort of tips would you be able to give to our residents or other younger members to say, this is the way you should do it to avoid my pitfalls?
Maybe, yeah. So, I mean, one of the things is the journey will be a lot different for most of our junior members and people interested in dermatology. And purely that's just because most people don't do internal medicine residency first. Although I don't know that I want to call that a pitfall, because I think it really did give me a really good medical foundation. And so if I could go back in time, I wouldn't change it. I would still do internal medicine first, but recognizing that that's not the typical way these days that people do dermatology, it's a little bit harder for me for that reason too, to actually provide a lot of tips. Like sometimes, learners will say, well, how do you get into dermatology? What do I need to do? And I have to very honest and frankly say to them, I don't know. I don't, to be fair, I don't know if I would get into dermatology. You're reading these applications of these excessively accomplished medical students. And I just think to myself, ooh, these people are impressive. I wouldn't have been in this category. So, that's not really answering your question, Catherine. But what I think some of the challenges are sort of deciding how you want your career to look. Because I think the other benefit of dermatology is you have a lot of options and opportunities. So whether you're in, private practice or academic practice, if you're in a blended model, whether you are in a group practice with other dermatologists, other specialists, or by yourself, I think there's a whole lot of ways that you can go. And so spending time during residency if you can. Now, COVID obviously has put a bit of a damper here, but in a perfect world, residents will spend time with different models to see what suits them best, because, the model of what they're exposed to during training does not reflect how the vast majority of dermatologists practice day to day in Canada. And so I think one of the things, if I could give them advice, would be to say, check out those different models of practice and see where you think you might fit. Also realizing that where you start out with may not be where you see yourself or where you find yourself 10 years later, like in my case.
Right. So how did it happen that you started off in clinical practice and then ended up coming into academia?
I've always had a portion of academic practice. And so from the beginning, I've always had a clinic at the hospital. I've always been involved in residency. Early on, when my husband was doing his fellowship training, we lived in Ottawa. When we came back, I became the program director. So there was a period of time where I had sort of a 50-50 mix. The opportunity arose about a year ago or year and a half ago where our group needed a new division head, and the timing seemed kind of right for me. And so that's what led me from private practice blended model into full academic practice. Had you asked me 10 years ago, would you see yourself in full academic practice? Oh, no. And I think there's a lot of pros and cons to both. And the time was right for me to do that. Whether that's forever, I don't know. That's the other beauty of dermatology. You're not stuck with that. And so if in a few years' time, it seems like it would be a better opportunity to do something different, you can. And you're not beholden to, or you don't have to stay at the hospital. So you're not a surgeon, like you're not requiring the resources or the other people. You really can build your practice the way you want to. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's good advice to younger people, to have the chance to experience different models and then choose what seems to have a good fit, and to realize that nothing is permanent. I think that's also very helpful. When I started off in practice, I had many different clinics all over the city. I'd go from one to the other, and then gradually chose the ones that pleased me most. But we are very blessed to have a range of opportunities.
Absolutely.
So, tell me, what as academic head, what sort of challenges do you have, and what strengths and weaknesses of your current program are there?
So it's all strengths, no weaknesses. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But
maritime, right?
That's right. We're very positive in the Atlantic region. But, I think there's challenges, and I think some of it is regional, but I think some of the challenges that we're facing are most likely across the board in Canada. And the biggest thing being, access to dermatology or access to dermatologists. And so there's few of us. There's many people with skin problems. And so certainly trying to see all of those people is a challenge. And so, one of the things we'd love to have is more dermatologists practicing, and in the Maritimes, at least, or in Nova Scotia, outside of Halifax proper, because many patients are driving 3, 4, 5 hours to be able to see somebody. And although we have a couple of colleagues outside of the city, it's untenable for them to see the entire patient population in those regions. And so one of the things is access. And then the other thing is just access in general to primary care in particular. And so there's a huge percentage of patients in Nova Scotia that don't have a primary care provider. And so that sets up a whole bunch of challenges that I think trickle down to the subspecialty level and back, because you may see somebody, you may not normally need to see them back repeatedly to be able to say manage, but you have to, because you have nowhere to send them. So I think those, and then, challenges within politics of hospitals is something as well that you really can't avoid. In terms of strengths, I think that one of the greatest strengths that we have here in terms of our residency training program is super strong focus towards general clinical dermatologists. And so, residents spend a ton of time in clinics. There aren't big chunks of time where they're off doing other things. They have an autonomous senior resident clinic in the second half of their fourth year and all through their fifth year. That helps to develop them into, that consultant level, being able to practice independently. So I think those are some really big factors. I think we have a great keen new program director that took over for me, Dr. Ashley Sutherland, and she's got a lot of great ideas and energy, and that's really coming across in the things that she's bringing to our residency program. I think the small number of residents that we have is also great because there's less dilution, I guess, if you will, in terms of seeing like a broad spectrum of patients. And then the challenge with a smaller program is that sometimes some of the more subspecialized areas are not as easily accessible. And so, we don't have the super sub specialist in skin lymphoma, for example, or, we maybe don't have as many opportunities and as many options for allergic contact patch clinics. We have them, but, not as many as you would see in a larger program like in Toronto.
So how many residents do you have?
So right now we have 8, and they're spread out. And so, every year we have 1 or 2 residents through CARMS. So our program has really built. When I was a resident, I sound like one of those people, but when I was a resident, there were big chunks of time where I was the only resident, which was good in terms of getting the experience and exposure, but a challenge in terms of having other people to study with or bounce ideas off of. And so we have a nice small program, but it really has grown over the past 10 years to be more robust.
And are those residents going to stay in Nova Scotia, or do they have any obligations?
Some of them are. In terms of our newest grads, so we did have 2 people stick around a little longer for maternity leaves that they had taken during residency. And so one has set up practice here already, which is Dr. Bosworth. And then Dr. Westby is going to be setting up practice outside of Halifax in the Valley, which is going to be really helpful for our patients in the western half of the province. And she'll be joining the other dermatologist already there, Dr. Schaffelberg. So that's really exciting. Our 2 current PGY5s are planning to stick around. Our PGY4 is planning to stick around. And then beyond that, most of our residents are planning to stick around, or at least if they're not planning to, I'm planning to convince them to stick around.
Well, your great attitude in the Maritimes. My husband always loved dealing with the Maritimers who were happy if things arrived next week, whereas people from Toronto wanted it the day before.
Yeah, we're a little bit more used to waiting and not having ready access for sure. Yeah.
And so can you tell me a funny story in your training along the way, or things that have happened to you that stand out?
So a funny story, there's probably a ton of funny stories where I made some type of mistake. I think some of maybe rather what I'd like to share would be some advice that one of my mentor colleagues gave me, and that's Dr. Tremaine. So when I started practice, I was fortunate to be able to have trained with Rob and then join practice with Rob and Mike Reardon at the time in a private practice. And that was wonderful for me as a fresh dermatologist, because those guys were nothing but helpful. Anytime I had a question about a patient or there was something I hadn't learned in residency, they, with open doors, like, come and ask me a question anytime. And then this, over my career so far, has extended out to all of my former mentors and people that I've worked with, including my other previous office partner, Dr. Scott Murray. But one piece of advice that Rob gave me was, you can always work more, but it's really hard to work less. And so think about that before you set up your schedule. And so, that's not a funny story at all, but it's a piece of advice that I really took to heart. I give to all of the residents, and I say the same thing. You can always work more. It's hard to work less. And so, for the last 10 years, I haven't booked things on Friday afternoons. Our academic half days, Friday mornings, Friday afternoons. I will stick around and do paperwork now that I'm full-time academic. But prior to that, I took the afternoon off, and you can always add it back in. But to his point, it would have been really, really hard to do that for a number of years and then take it away. So I think that's a really sage piece of advice. What else can I tell you?
The thing too, that we need to give ourselves some time to do them. Just go to the bank, or if you ever want to write up a paper, that sort of thing.
That's exactly it. And if you don't protect your own time or build in time that you've protected for whatever you want, like you said, life things, research, hobbies, whatever, nobody's going to do that for you, because the machine of medicine will take until you have nothing more to give. And so, carving that out, and the beauty, another beauty of dermatology, this is like this is why dermatology is so wonderful. But, another the beauty of it is, with a predominantly ambulatory care setting, or when patients are admitted, tend to be admitted through, internal medicine or other subspecialties, we have that flexibility to be able to do that, to protect time. And so, your time is really worth more than money. It can be worth your sanity. So. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's a great summary. And so going forward, what other things would you recommend, or other highlights of dermatology you'd like to share with your colleagues across Canada? And what has the CDA in particular brought to you, and why would you say that people should be involved in the CDA?
Well, I have to say, the CDA has allowed me to acquire a whole nother skill set that I did not acquire during medical school or residency or clinical practice. And that's really in that collaborative leadership, communications side of things. And so, not everybody wants to be involved in leadership positions, but I think if you have any interest in that, the CDA is a great place to be able to do that. You can be involved right through from residency through the CDA RFS. There's tons of committees to join. I often encourage people to just join a committee, see what you think, meet the people. It's allowed me to have certainly an increase in my network across the country. And this, the dermatology community in Canada is relatively small. And so there's a lot of names that I recognized before being involved in CDA, but I've subsequently been able to meet and work with most of those people. And it really does increase your network when you're thinking about, what do you do with a complicated patient, or, who should you tell somebody to go work with, or you're looking at a research paper, or you want to do a project. And so the CDA really opened a lot of those doors. As well, just the general basics of being part of a board of directors. And so realizing, what is the fiduciary duty of a board member, and what kind of decisions do you make, and how do boards work? And that was very enlightening for me. And it has carried forward with a number of skills that I apply regularly now as the division head. And so, I think not everybody has to go, I'm going to be, I want to go for the presidency, but I think certainly being involved increases awareness, networking, you know what the CDA is doing. And I think when people take a moment to look at what the CDA is actually doing, it's incredible. There's so many things. And until you actually do that or be involved, sometimes you're not fully aware of the scope of the services that are provided by a very small group of people that make up the core office that provide all of these services to us nationally. So, you know, being involved in the CDA, I think is a great move. And I don't think you can go wrong when you do that. And I think when we look at advocacy on behalf of our specialty, on behalf of our patients, it really is that united voice that the CDA provides that, you know, you want to have your voice in that larger voice.
Right.
For sure.
And you must have been one of the youngest CDA presidents ever, no?
I think I was the youngest, but,
yeah.
You know, and I remember at one of the conferences trying to encourage, you know, the younger cohort and saying, you know, people don't have to look at, well, I can't do that because I'm not at the end of my career or I haven't done anything special. And then I always say to them, well, just be like, I didn't. And so, you know, I think just sort of like leaping in and being available, you don't have to have done all those things. You don't have to have been, you know, the pinnacle of your career either. And so, yeah, I was on the younger side. I think at times people probably were exhausted by my constant flow of ideas. But at the end of the day, you know, I think it's great to have fresh ideas from a diverse group of people.
I agree. And well, I'd like to congratulate you on the efforts in education that you've done through the years, and give a little plug for your Dermatologists podcast that I believe could be for CDA members as well as the residents that it's geared for, because I've learned a lot of pearls through listening to expert colleagues. And I thank you for that. And you really have had a consistent theme. I find that's very outstanding in thinking of Kerri Purdy. You know, seriously, you know, you really have education on the forefront, and that's a big part of what the CDA is and what it should be. So it's great to have you still on board with all those projects and the skin diversity webinars that were held this year, and it's really good. Chapeau, as they say.
Merci. I'm blushing, but you know, I do appreciate that, and I do, you know, I think if you looked at what I wanted to do with CDA, it really was education based. And I do, you know, I guess if you want to talk about where you'd see a passion for me, education is a passion. And all of our colleagues who have participated in Dermalogs over the past 3 seasons have been so generous with their time and their pearls. And they have all been so great to talk to. And I learn something every single time. And in fact, often go back and listen, because as I'm listening to the person talking, I'm always thinking, well, what will I ask them next? And so I like to go back. I don't like to listen to myself or hear my own voice, but I do pick up on pearls if I listen after and go, you know, yeah, they really did share a lot. And so I do, you know, with the generosity of time for so many of our colleagues, there really have been many things that I've learned through doing Dermalogs, and it's just been a lot of fun. And you know, I really appreciate the CDA making that happen, because early on it was just, you know, I want to do this thing. And they said, sure, that sounds good. And then, you know, since then we're where we are now. So, yeah.
Well, congratulations. And thanks for being such an active member of the CDA. And, you know, it's great to have a Maritimer on board. Part of my heart is in the Maritimes also, because we used to go to Prince Edward Island every summer.
Yes.
Once you have that connection, you just, there's nothing else like it. So there's
a reason a lot of people, you know, from the Maritimes, when they leave, they flock back, or people that visited come later and can continue to come. And, you know, I think it's there's just a feel. You're right. There's just a feel, and it's not all, hearts and roses all the time, but I think in general, it's a very kind population in general. So,
yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us, and I'm sure our colleagues will be happy to learn a little bit more about you. One more thing, I just want to ask you: how do you do this balance of family life? Because your husband's in medicine too, and then you have two children, two boys.
I do. Yeah. Yeah. Do I balance? I'm not entirely sure. I think the other tip on that is getting help. And so I have two kids. They're two boys. They're 9 and 5. They're starting to come a little bit out of that, like, require your time 24/7. Another piece of advice, this is the me giving advice that Rob Tremaine gave me. But I remember, a few years ago when I was trying to decide, should I do CDA? Should I do division head? He said, I said, I got kids. And he said, little kids have little problems. Big kids have big problems. And so at the time I decided that doing some of these roles, maybe earlier on in the career trajectory is good, because my kids are small and tend not to have, and then that way I will have done those things. And then, maybe when my kids are a bit older, if they need me around a bit more, I will have done those things. And so, but, in terms of balance, like, we're very lucky here. Our family's nearby. We have a nanny. My kids are both in school now. And because of the flexibility of dermatology, I've been able to manage my schedule for the most part. And fortunately, on call, although is often busy on the telephone, doesn't always require me to be leaving at all hours of the night like my husband is. And so, I think having people that can help you, whether they're related to you or you're paying them, is the main reason that I'm able to do what I do. Yeah.
Okay. All great advice. Well, thank you for sharing, and we'll see you around at the Women's Leadership Meeting.
Absolutely. And then in Quebec City in June.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to chat.
Yes, me too. Okay. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.